Before we jump into this podcast, let's just have a first word from our sponsors, NordVPN, the fastest VPN in the world and an absolute essential travelling companion. You can use NordVPN on 10 devices with just one account, easily switching your virtual location to access apps and websites in other countries. But if you're out of the country, make sure that you've got NordVPN to be able to use your subscriptions and watch the live sport that you might miss. If you're at home, use it to see if you can save money with products that might be cheaper in another region. Go to nordvpn.com/Manchester to get 4 extra months on the 2-year plan. The link is also in the podcast description. Hello and welcome to the Manchester is Red podcast. This is the Midweek Debate. We've had a little mini hiatus, I think. We've been gone for a week and a half, or maybe 2. I had a week off. I think Tyrone Marshall, who I'm sitting here with today, I think he had a week off as well, but we're back. I'm sure you'd be delighted to hear. Tyrone, how are you?
I'm good, Stephen. It must be 3 weeks. 3 weeks at least.
Was it 3 weeks?
Since we did a podcast.
Well, I think I did a special one, didn't I?
Absolutely brilliant.
Any time that I don't get to see you for is actually very good time.
Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly, mate.
Don't miss you, to be fair.
It's a shame you're back in my life today, but there we are.
We've got a new clock in the studio. Obviously, watchers on YouTube won't be able to see. It's got the temperature on. It says 19 degrees, but it's definitely not 19 degrees in here.
No, it's cold in this room, isn't it? I remarked on that before. It actually said 18 degrees. Oh, this is my second podcast of the day, having done the Talking City podcast earlier today, and it said 18 then. So
how's the voice?
It reckons it. The voice is holding up, surprisingly, mate. Yeah.
Right,
I won't be able to talk when I get home, but no one talks to me in my house anyway, so that'll be absolutely fine. So
fair enough.
Yeah, apparently it's getting warmer, but I don't believe that.
We are going to focus in on the summer transfer window in the first part of this podcast, Ty. We've agreed that today. Just chat about a few transfer bits, what a good window would look like for United, who they might sell to fund those transfers. And then in the second section, as usual, if you've listened to this podcast, you know we'll have a bit more of an informal chit-chat. We'll look back at the Wolves game just gone at the weekend and look ahead briefly to the Cherries on Sunday afternoon down on the South Coast. Yeah, so let's get cracking. Big news this week, last couple of days. Matthias Cunha and Liam Delap are emerging as very big targets for United. We presume Liam Delap would be. We'll start with Cunha though, because he plays for Wolves, just at Old Trafford on the weekend. Bit of an audition. I was at the game on Boxing Day at Molineux. I don't know if you remember, if you watched it, Ty, you might have been at City, but he trapped the ball. Oh, and it was just, it was stunning. And everyone gasped. It was a beautiful piece of skill. So if United decided they wanted to sign him on the back of that, then fair enough. That's how I would base my transfer strategy too. He's a brilliant player in all seriousness. 16 goals in all competitions this season. He's got some European heritage because he's been at Hertha Berlin, RB Leipzig, Atletico Madrid, of course, as well. And he would, let's face it, improve United's attack.
Yeah, he definitely would. I think it's a real interesting one. He fits Amorim's system perfectly because he's essentially playing the exact same role for Wolves as a number 10 in what is pretty much the exact same system. But he's a bit of a maverick, I think. And I was talking to a Wolves fan. I was at City last night. I was talking to a Wolves fan in the press room before the game and said, I think it's easy for Cunha to be like a big fish. He's an ideal big fish in a small pond where he's kind of given license to go where he wants. Like at Old Trafford on Sunday, he played the left-sided number 10 role, but he was everywhere, really. He wasn't in that position that often. He goes looking for the ball. And he is that, there's almost, the Wolves fan is kind of saying it's too far of a leap, but shades of Cantona about him. And he is that kind of like
steady,
free-spirited, like maverick player. And maybe that's what United need. But I was reading the piece he'd done on it, and it's an interesting Sky stats that he spent more time walking this season than any other Premier League player.
I think it's actually a valid stat, but I saw someone make a good point that are these stats only trotted out when United sign players? You rarely see that with players, do you? But I actually think it's a valid stat.
Yeah,
myself.
Well, United are the one that's signing the player that doesn't run.
Yeah.
And they're signing him for a manager who's just said that, well, he hasn't said it, but everyone knows it.
Hard work.
The biggest issue in this team is the lack of intensity. So I think there's an interesting balance there. And, you mentioned Cunha before. He's got European pedigree. He was at Atletico Madrid and it didn't work out for him. He's much more experienced now. He's more mature now. I think he's a brilliant, brilliant footballer. I would love to see him play for United because I think he's
entertaining.
He's entertaining. He's great to watch. But I do think he would have to adapt from, I get the impression that he's he's good at being that, like I say, that big fish in a small pond who's kind of given license to, you don't always have to do the pressing or the tracking back. You're our match winner. Go and do that. And I think at United, he would have to fit in to a more rigid tactical system, and not just at United. Even if he'd gone to, a lesser club like Newcastle or another one of the big six clubs, as clubs. Arsenal were interested in him. Another one of the big clubs, yeah. He would have to change and adapt. That he becomes part of the system rather than almost standing outside the system, if you know what I mean, which he does at Wolves. And I think he clearly can adapt. All football to that level can adapt. And like I said, that in a way, the most important thing is that he fits this tactical system, and he would get that. But I think he would have to change as well and become part of the collective rather than like an individual in a way.
And you talk about that, and it kind of, people have highlighted his attitude kind of problems or concerns, I should say. There's a grey area there, and does that not kind of relate to how hard he works on the pitch, perhaps? It's definitely a question mark. Having said that, he is 25 years old. He's proven in the Premier League. He's done it. We've seen it with our own eyes that he can operate in this country against very good teams. And he's been excellent in a really crap Wolves side.
Yeah.
I mean, United are below Wolves. Are they below? No, sorry, just above.
They're
Wolves.
Level on points.
I was checking the table today. It's not been good. But he does tick a lot of boxes, but there are some that he doesn't tick, which you're right, it makes it an interesting transfer, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. And, I guess the market United are going to have to shop in this summer. They're probably not going to get a player who ticks every box. But I'm sure if Cunha is told, keep doing what you're doing at Wolves, but this is the way we press, this is the work you have to do off the ball, I'm sure he can do it. It's, like I say, he's always struck me as that kind of maverick player who's ideal in a way.
You think he'd be more willing to do it as well?
I think he'd be more willing to do it.
Move like
I think
that.
He can do it. He's an interesting player as well, and like I say, he's very emotional. I think on the pitch, he's hot-headed is probably a bit too much of a cliche. He's had his disciplinary problems this season. I think that's maybe a one-off. I don't think that's really followed him round in his career particularly. But obviously there was a headbutt at Bournemouth, I think, and then the elbow in the back of the head of I think it's a security guard against Ipswich, wasn't it? When he knocked the guy's glasses off, which big no-no for me, Matthias, big no-no. But he's that in a way as well. That's kind of what you need in some players. United, we've spoken about the lack of intensity in their running, but maybe you need that kind of nastiness in a way as well.
It's a bit of a cliche, but it goes kind of hand in hand with these South American players, doesn't it? And you think back to Ten Hag's first season, and they had that real kind of South American flair and grit that was like, they'd underpinned the team Martinez, Anthony, Casemiro, they all had that biting edge, and they played on the line. And Cunha perhaps is the same. United don't exactly have a brilliant record buying Brazilians, but you can't write off a whole nationality just because of a few bad apples.
No, you can't. And it's funny that Anthony Ten Hag said in his first season that what he'd identified in his first summer was, again, this lack of intensity in players, this lack of an edge, the lack of kind of character and personality on the pitch. And a lot of his signings went to changing that. Casemiro and Martinez were real winners. And Anthony bought that kind of, a bit of an arrogant streak, a nasty streak, a competitive streak on the pitch. And, it's funny in a way that we're now back under Amorim, and he's kind of privately saying the same things, that the team hasn't got the intensity to carry out his demands. But
that's why he likes Mason Mount so much, just to go a little bit off topic, but he's come on and he had back-to-back yellow cards. He's got that edge, he's got that kind of, I think he's actually been criticised in the last week and a half because people are watching him come on in games and just kick people. But I like that about man.
Yeah. And it's probably
he needs to do a lot more than just kick people.
It's probably an underrated part of his game. But yeah, like I think he needs people like that. But most important, I think the biggest thing he loves about Mount is his ability to press as a number 10 and his intelligence of who and when to press. And maybe that's the one area of Cunha's game that we probably don't really see that much at Wolves, but the area of his game where he'd have to change to fit in at United. But he clearly can. And the most important thing is that the guy's a match winner. The guy can win games on his own. And you look at this United squad, Bruno Fernandes is the only match winner in that squad. And if you're going to be successful to the level United want to be successful, you have to have more match winners, more players capable of, when the team's not playing well, of bailing them out of trouble, of when you underperform, when you're having an off day, you've got 2 or 3 players who can just do something, grab the game by the scruff of the neck and win it on their own. And I think Cunha is that kind of player.
We agree it'd be a good signing. I think we both agree on that. Let's move on then, because the striker position is actually something we do disagree about, I think. We've talked about on this podcast before. Liam Delap, we kind of got into him a little bit, and Victor Osimhen. We'll talk about both of their credentials now. You're more in the Delap camp, I'm more in the Osimhen camp. I'm not saying that Delap isn't a fantastic talent and hasn't got a huge ceiling, because he clearly does. He scored 12 goals in the Premier League this season in a rubbish Ipswich side. So he's clearly got a bright future. And I've saw comparisons with Harry Kane, and people say, well, if you want a future Harry Kane, sign him now. But we've spent 2.5 years on this podcast and writing articles talking about the lack of experience centre forwards and how they can't score goals. And I just think it would be suicidal, asking for trouble for a third successive summer not to sign another experienced striker. And I think Osimhen is that man.
Yeah, I mean, I don't. If they sign Osimhen, I don't think they've got it wrong by any stretch of the imagination. I think part of the reason you're against Delap is because of what's happened previously. But part of the reason it's, just because it's not worked out with Højlund and Xerxes doesn't mean it won't work out with Delap.
He's 22. There's 4 days between himself and Højlund. He could come into the club, score a few goals. Inevitably, when things are tough and maybe a few bad results, there's stories that are done. The press are starting to talk about it. There's pundits who are highlighting his performances. The pressure at United is enormous, and it makes players crumble. And I think if you're young, it's so difficult to deal with.
Yeah, but I mean,
especially in that position.
It can make experienced players crumble. It could make Osimhen crumble and underperform. And Osimhen's never played in the Premier League, and it is a big difference. I mean, what Osimhen has done at Galatasaray this year will have no bearing on coming into United. He can score 2 goals a week against, I don't even know how many teams there are in the Turkish league, to be honest. But essentially, apart from Fenerbahce, Besiktas, and maybe Istanbul Başakşehir, he's filling his boots against every other team. It's totally irrelevant. It's like playing against championship teams, maybe League One teams at the bottom end of that league. And you look at the Galatasaray squad, and then you look at the squads at the team at the bottom of that league. The gap is huge. It's the same with Gyökeres at Sporting. You're filling your boots.
He has scored in the Champions League for Napoli. He has scored in the Europa League this season against Tottenham. He was impressive against Tottenham in that game.
Yeah, like I say, I think his record's good, and I don't think he's necessarily the wrong signing.
But you'd rather Delap.
I think Delap's a quality player, and I think for 30 million, he's got a huge amount of potential. And I get the point that they've signed. I mean, the Højlund signing was a joke. It was an absolute joke. The guy had 4 good months. They paid £72 million for him. Having told people 2 days before they wouldn't go over 60. It was a classic case of United being absolutely played and conned by a club. Atalanta say, Paris Saint-Germain are in for him. If you read the papers, Paris Saint-Germain are in for him. Suddenly, John Murtaugh's in an Atalanta hotel till 3 a.m. in the morning, concluding the deal. I mean, Atalanta must have left that.
Back in that hotel now.
Well, yeah. They must have left that meeting and absolutely, laughed their sides off, shall we say? That they must have left thinking, how easy are this club to fleece? Like, how can they be played like this? And they staggeringly overpaid for Højlund, who, like I say, he'd had a few good months for Atalanta. That's essentially all it was.
Is Delap not had a few good months for Ipswich?
I think he's had a good season.
He's had a good season for Ipswich, but he scored 12 Premier League goals. Højlund last season scored 10 Premier League goals.
Yeah, he scored 10 Premier League goals for Manchester United.
And that United side were very bad. Obviously, they finished
they were a hell of a lot better than this Ipswich side.
But still pretty bad.
Yeah, but so Delap scored more in a much worse side.
I'm not denying that he's got huge upside. And for 30 million, I can see why he ticks a lot of boxes for a lot of people.
Yeah.
I just think how often we've talked about it and every fan has talked about it. It would just be unbelievable to talk about they need an experienced centre forward, they need a proven goal scorer, and then go and make the same mistake again. I just think it'd be comical. I actually think I don't in a bad way.
I don't think Osimhen's a guarantee of goals. I don't think you put Osimhen in that team and you guarantee him 25 goals a season.
In the current market,
I don't see it.
He's the closest thing to a guarantee on the current market, I believe. And you can see, I understand you talk about the Turkish division and the standard of it, but 30 goals in 35 appearances, he's only done what he can. He's proved his well-being, essentially.
I mean, you stick Højlund in that Galatasaray team, he'd have got 25 goals.
What is it? It's over 75 goals. I think it's 76 in 120-ish appearances for Napoli.
Yeah. He's been, there's no doubt he's been excellent for Napoli. Not denying that. And I do think he's a good player. I just don't think he's guaranteed to come in and score the goals. And I think when you add wages and transfer fee up, he will be a much, much bigger outlay than Delap, to the point that you're compromising a position somewhere else.
But that's the most important position on the pitch right now. And it arguably always is. They need goals, and it's not something you can kind of risk.
It is.
Are they really going to roll the dice on
it? It is the most important on the
pitch.
pitch. But in a way, as I've been saying recently, it doesn't matter who's up front for this United team. They don't create any chances. So it doesn't matter who's up front for them. So yes, it's the most important position on the pitch, but they also need players like Acuna who can create something. They need better wing-backs who can create something. They need a better system of play and patterns of play that can create something. You know, we've been through this debate previously and I think there's we were talking about Højlund as part of the conversation about Acuna last night, and I think there's a bit of Højlund isn't smart enough yet and hasn't developed enough to create chances for himself, which I think Delap has proven he can do at Ipswich. But also, he just doesn't get chances. You know, we would go back to that 21-game run without a goal. I think he had 14 shots. That's laughable, and that's not solely on him. That's not because he's turning down shooting opportunities. You know, watch him during a game. There must be 3 or 4 occasions every game when he just waves his hands in the air. I mean, you watch him during a game, and he looks like he absolutely hates playing up front for Manchester United, and I can see why, because you don't get any chances.
What I get about that is I don't.
So yeah, you put Osimhen in this team, and he'd probably score more goals because he's more experienced than Højlund. But he wouldn't score 25 in this team because this team don't create 25 chances for a striker across the season.
But next season, he'd score more goals than Delap, in my opinion. Do you know what? That's the thing. And it's, we could be right, you could be wrong.
Yeah,
do you know what I mean?
Like, we'll never get to find out. We'll just have to presume I'm right.
It's a game of opinions at the end, but I will be right in the end. In terms of other positions, Ty, I think we both would agree that they need a midfielder as well. Would you agree with that? Am I jumping to conclusions?
Yeah, holding midfielder.
Yeah, not a number 10, of course, because they've got too many number 10s.
Too many number 10s.
Casemiro, they need to be in Europe for him to be effective. Come on to him maybe a bit in this part. Collier's picked up a few injuries, a squad player. You've got Fernandes, Ugarte, but they need a midfielder, don't they? Another holding midfielder, and a very good one at that.
Yeah, I think, if you want 2 players for every position, I think really they've only got 3 at the moment.
Eriksen's leaving, of course.
Eriksen's leaving. So, and I don't think he's great as a holding position player anyway. So you're looking at Fernandes. I suppose your 4 at the moment would be Fernandes, Ugarte, Casemiro and Collier. I think maybe you'd want Collier as your 5th choice at the moment. And like we said, there's a lot of uncertainty over Casemiro's future. As good as he's been the last few months, his wages are still massive. And you can make the point that if they get back in the Champions League, if they win the Europa League and get in the Champions League, there's more games and there's more opportunity for him. It's also a 25% pay rise if they get back in the Champions League, which makes his wages.
But you need someone to buy him, which is the thing, and that's been the thing in the last window.
Yeah, that's the problem.
Need someone who would pay the money.
Where's he going to go?
Yeah.
That is the problem. But it's 350 grand a week if they get back in the Champions League. That's it's what 15 to 17 million a year, something like that. It's a massive saving. So I think they definitely need another holding midfielder because I think Fernandes' future must be there now, given
that's what's really interesting. We talked about that on the podcast because I'm not sure it is. He's been very good in that role, and he's sparked up a really good relationship with Ugarte. If this player comes in who we're saying they need to sign, right? So a really high quality, defensive midfielder, holding midfielder, do they start alongside Ugarte? Or does Ugarte drop out the side, or did they start alongside Fernandes? Either way, you need to have that strength. But in terms of who actually starts, it's an interesting one again.
Yeah, I think if you got a proper, the Ugarte Fernandes is a nice balance because one's a kind of combative defensive midfielder, one can set the tempo. So I think it depends who you sign. But if you signed a defensive midfielder, then I think there's an argument they could start ahead of Ugarte. I think he's been decent recently. I still don't think he's great with the ball, to be honest.
It's pretty mental that though, isn't it? That the fact that last summer they signed this player who said, right, this summer we've waited until we've got the right price, we've negotiated it, this is who we've got, Ugarte, fantastic. And then 1 year later, we're talking about signing a player in his position. Is that, it's probably a bit of both, partly on him and partly on the midfield situation where obviously Casemiro's another year older, Eriksen's leaving. Probably a bit of both, isn't it?
Yeah, probably a bit of both. And like I say, if they signed a player who was maybe at the same level as him, who was changing in and out with him, that wouldn't bother me. I think there's much more pressing issues in terms of who starts than if you went into next season with Ugarte and Fernandes as your midfield again, I'd be perfectly happy with that, to be honest. But they do need, like I say, if Casemiro goes, Eriksen goes, you're really looking at Fernandez, Ugarte and Collier as your only real options, I think, in those holding positions. And at that point, you clearly need another player who can play there, because he doesn't seem to want to play any of the number 10s there. And you've got way too, when you sign or if you sign Cunha, I think you've got way too many number 10s, to be honest.
And then I guess the fourth would be, for me, it'd be a right wing back after that. Dalot has actually played better in the last few weeks, to be fair to him, but he's not a natural right wing back. And we saw the difference with Dorgu, although slightly up and down again in the last few weeks. What it means and the benefit of having a player who is tailor-made to that position. The qualities are completely different to a natural fullback. So they do need a player in that role done. And then Dalot could compete to start with that player. And that would be beneficial again.
Yeah, definitely. And I think, again, it comes back to the 2 players for every position. I don't see Mazraoui as a wing back, to be honest. I don't think he can really play there. I think there's a significant drop off, and you're essentially playing a fullback. I think I don't think he's got the skill set to play wing back in a team that Amorim hopes United will be next year, when they're dominating possession and dominating games, and you want him. Amorim referred to them as wingers after the Leicester FA Cup game, I think, when he was questioned about Dorgu starting on the right, and he referred to them as wingers, and he mentioned wingers like Dalot. And if that's how he sees his wing backs, I mean, Mazraoui's not a winger. So I think you definitely need another right wing back to compete with Dalot. Like I say, I think Dalot, since he's been back on the right, I think he's been pretty good recently. He's still up and down. I think there's still probably
he's just a very good, consistent squad
He's a very good, consistent squad player, yeah.
I think you want to compete for top 6. And
I think you probably want an upgrade, don't you?
I think that's fair. So we've just talked about it there. You can kind of picture what the team might look like next season with those kind of hypothetical signings.
What about a goalkeeper?
Oh. Well, I said on the podcast...
And a centre-back. You were making a case for a centre-back,
yeah,
not so long ago. That's got to have gone out of the window
probably,
now, I think.
But because all positions really need to be addressed, but it's in terms of what is the priority right now. I mean, even with Onana, I said that you've probably got to kick the can down the road. And still, I'm probably of that belief still. Yeah. Unfortunately, I mean, in an ideal world, you get a new goalkeeper this summer, but other positions probably need addressed before Onana.
Yeah, I think the only way anything happens with Onana is if a Saudi club comes in for him and he wants to go. And then you're getting decent money back for him and you can reinvest it in a keeper. But yeah, I think unless that happens, I think you're probably sticking with him, aren't you? Because I don't think you can engineer a situation unless that happens.
So Matthias Cunha, let's say the Laparosman, a centre midfielder and a right wing back. You can picture that team in your head. Where does that team finish next season? It's so hard to make that prediction right now because we're sitting on the 23rd of April and we need to make that. We need to say that after the transfer window. Yeah. But early prediction, when you think ahead to next season, what are your thoughts? It's really difficult because everyone else is going to improve as well.
Yeah, they are. And the competition's fierce at the top end of this division. And the unknown is Amorim's system, to be honest about it. And, I know a lot of supporters would like to hear it. And he's a phenomenal communicator. He gets great backing from the fans. The fans want him to succeed. I want him to succeed. But we haven't seen enough of that system working well to say that even with those players, it's going to lead to a massive improvement. I don't think still.
Vito Pereira at the weekend came in and obviously was it December at Wolves?
Yeah.
And he's taken a lot more points and he's used the same system.
Yeah.
And that was highlighted at the weekend. Well, why couldn't Amorim have done it? You're right, though. At the start of next season, it's crucial United hit the ground running because if you get to end of September, October time, and things still aren't good, the finger will be pointed.
Yeah, but this is kind of the, he's changed his tune a bit on the coming in mid-season, which he's probably done because he's here now, so he kind of needs to put a positive spin on it. And he said it's given me time to work with the players and get the message across. But what it's also done is it's not damaged his standing now, but if next season starts and, like you say, we get to the October international break, say, and they're bottom half and things are patchy, what has happened this season, which at the moment is not on Amorim at all, I don't think, suddenly
it comes into the thing.
The narrative changes, doesn't it? And it's, okay, how much of last season was actually on him? So I think it's added to the pressure at the start of next season, which in a way is a different debate, but that's kind of it's the unknown in terms of predicting where that squad finishes, if the system, all of those players we're talking about fit into that system, and if the system works and the system improves, I still think you're only looking top 8 guaranteed.
Well, they need to be attempting top 6. It was kind of the same remit when Ten Hag got the job, wasn't it? Aim for top 6. Anything better is probably very good. Obviously, finish third, Champions League, League Cup, fantastic season, but top 6 probably has to be the aim.
Even top 5, really. If you're thinking 5th, most seasons it's going to guarantee Champions League
now, yeah.
But yeah, I think, I think that would be a decent. I think that'd be a pretty good window, I guess. But I don't know. I just find it the hard thing about predicting next season is that, like I say, we've not seen enough of this system working to its maximum potential to say these players are definitely going to make all the difference next season. And part of that is that he hasn't got the players for it, really. But there's been a lot of games where I've watched United in this system and they've hugely underwhelmed. And to be honest, I find it really boring to watch. And that's kind of the question for me going into next season, which makes it difficult to predict.
But, you can't really judge him until he's back properly in the transfer window. I mean, Aidan Heaven and Patrick Dorgu in January, and we've always maintained that. There's no point of kind of making any judgments now. He needs to be given those players, and then next season, that's when you can finally judge Amorim.
Yeah, I think you judge him from August onwards, don't you? Presuming they have a good window and he gets players who fit this system, then
it's on the club now. They've made the decision. They've appointed him, back him.
They've backed him. And I think, and I mean, backing him's a huge risk. I mean, I'm not going to name him, but there's a journalist I know who goes pretty regularly to United games who thinks United should sack him this summer and get out of it before they start signing players for a system to inevitably sack him at some point next season. And maybe part of that is kind of the...
Well, is this system not the game model now? We've heard those buzzwords. Is this not United's new identity?
Well, this is
because if you are signing players for this formation, that suggests that this will be our way of playing going forward.
Why aren't the youth team playing at them?
The answer to that, we asked Nick Cox that question a few weeks ago. He said it prepares players for professional football, playing in different systems. They want an all-round player, not one who's just kind of molded for one formation. But I agree. It's a very good question, isn't it? Which is why we asked it. But and supporters have wanted to know the answer to that because it surely would make sense for the academy to play it.
Yeah.
But that was their answer.
Yeah.
Whether or not that has been a conversation and someone, Nick Cox and other members of staff have fought against it, I'm not so sure. But perhaps that has potential. Maybe Will Cox has said, we'll do it this way. And the staff have said, maybe not.
Yeah. It is.
I made a case for it.
I mean, it's a big change from, when Ratcliffe did that sit down in February last year, he spoke about how kind of managers had run the show and they'd signed players for managers rather than having this overarching game model. But he's now done exactly the same because it's a big if, and I don't think this is guaranteed to happen at all. I think Amorim could easily be a success in this system. You look at Inter under Simone Inzaghi, who play a back three and are one of the best teams in Europe. Pereira at Wolves has been getting great results. So I don't think it's
a bit of a jump there from
bit of a jump, Inter and Wolves. Only 2 examples I can think of. So I don't think it's guaranteed to not work. But Amorim Ratcliffe talked about this. We've signed players for a manager and then gone to another manager. But that is exactly what's happening now. This isn't United's game model. A back three
for me,
is not United's game model.
Is it not? Because that answer...
No, because the next manager, if Amorim doesn't work, say next season's disastrous and he gets sacked at Christmas next year, do they appoint a manager who plays a back three?
Well, that answer that Ratcliffe has given suggests that is their model going forward.
How can you come out
and say that, right?
I would put my life savings on the fact that they do not appoint a manager with a back three if it doesn't work.
But I'm trying
to
point out how ridiculous it is.
Exactly,
the fact that he's come out and said that, and then they're now backing, obviously, Amorim, rightly so. Yeah. But again, you're backing a manager. So now you've said that implies that is our way of playing. They're not just backing the manager himself, if you get what I'm trying to say. Yeah. They're backing the formation and that style of play. So he's going to look, I mean, he already has looked very stupid because he's made a lot of bad decisions, but that would look very, very bad.
Yeah. Well, like I say, they said that and then appointed one of the managers with the most unique playing style in Europe, and also a manager who has said, this is it. This is my way, and it's my way or I'm gone. So
game model,
there isn't a game model. It was a stupid phrase that has proved to be redundant. So yeah, I think it's going to be fascinating to see how they start next season, especially if they have that good window and they sign the players we've mentioned, and the squad has proper wing backs next year and proper number 10s.
Well, they won't have a proper striker.
And a striker
they'll have another 22-year-old leading the attack.
A striker that fits the system. But I see a lot of Gyökeres in Delap in terms of like his pace, and he's also strong. He can run the channel and hold the ball up, which is a big thing in Amorim's system. He wants his striker playing on the last line of defence. You can go long to him if needed. He can hold the ball up and bring others into play. Højlund can't do that. So I see a lot of similarities there. So they've got Delap or Osimhen, and they've got Acuna, and they've got a couple of wing backs, and they've got, another midfielder or whatever, then you would expect in August for them to be, like I say, I think top 8 next year would probably be all right, to be honest. But it's going to be fascinating to see how it goes.
They're going to have to make some sales. Obviously, Aston Villa have got the option to sign Marcus Rashford permanently for £40 million. Antony's improved form is going to be very helpful, you'd think. At Real Betis, Jadon Sancho hasn't exactly improved, but Chelsea have an obligation, which hopefully they don't break for United's sake and pay up a fee. But those 3 players are roughly working out, £95 million. They are really crucial. It's an obvious thing to say to fund the incomings, aren't they? And it has to be done as a priority really at the start of the window.
Yeah, I think 95 million for those 3 would be an absolute result, to be honest.
It seems too good to be true.
Does seem too good to be true. But like you say, Sancho has kind of refound form at Chelsea at a really good time, in that now they're probably thinking maybe we do take the 25 million and sign him, because he suddenly started playing pretty well again. Rashford's playing really well enough to have a market beyond Villa, even if they don't want him. And Antony's doing well in Spain to, I still think you'd probably struggle to get 30 million for Antony, to be honest, because clubs in Europe don't really have that sort of money.
His transfer record was mid-20s, I think. It's around 25 million. But
if you got 20 million for him, I think you'd take it.
I think it's 32, the magic number they need to prevent making a loss.
I don't think that's happening.
But they could probably scrape 25 of add-ons.
Maybe.
He's had a brilliant run, to be fair, the lad.
Yeah, he's been playing very well, hasn't he? But I think, you get 90 odd million, 80, 90, 95 for them.
Yeah.
It's an absolute result. And then there's others, we mentioned Casemiro. I still think one of Garnacho and Mainu goes purely because of the excess of number 10s.
I wanted to talk about it in this first part, but I'm conscious this new 4K camera that picks up our facial hair tie is about to cut off. So can we just briefly pause it there and come back to it? Is that all right?
Yeah.
Right, we'll be back in a moment. Welcome back to the Midweek Debate. We're briefly going to talk about, at the end of the first part, Alejandro Garnacho and Kobbie Mainoo tie. Before I really interrupted to have that pause. Hopefully they add revenue, pay some pints at the end of the season for us, of course. So. It's still topical, it's still relevant. We kind of got into it a few weeks ago. Amorim's had more time to see Garnacho, not so much with Kobbie Mainoo because the season's been stop-start due to injury. He's just returned Mainoo, obviously, from his muscle injury. Had a few cameo performances, then scored the equaliser against Lyon. Fantastic goal. But the jury's still out on kind of both of them, whether they will be here next season. Essentially, that's the point. Which do you think is more likely to leave? Do you think there's more merit in selling one than the other? What are your thoughts?
I think Garnacho's probably the more likely to leave. I still think he's an uneasy fit in this system. I don't think he's really grasped it as a number 10 yet. When he plays on the left, I still think he ends up playing on the wing, essentially. I don't think Amorim really wants that. We've seen him play on the right a lot. I think part of the reason he plays him as that right-sided number 10 is that because it forces him to come in field, basically. And also, when you play him on the left, he goes so wide that him and Dorgu end up operating in the same kind of areas a lot of the time. I look at him at times and I'm still not entirely sure he's enjoying playing as a number 10. And I just think he's, like I say, I still think there's a really good chance at least one of them goes, purely because I think the only position both of them can play or would play under Amorim is as a number 10. If they sign Cunha, I think I listed 6 before. It's Cunha, Mainoo, Garnacho, Mount,
Ahmad,
Xerxes and Ahmad. And who are your 2 starters? Cunha and Ahmad, probably. But
for me, we're talking about the midfielders there, and that's what my lunch piece was just about. I think there's still merit in Kobbie Mainoo playing in the pivot position. He was obviously given a go under Amorim. He had doubts. Some performances were decent. Some performances clearly made him have doubts. You think back to the Liverpool game, the 2-2 draw in December. It was Ugarte and Mainoo who were in the pivot there, and they were both fantastic. And everyone was raving about Manu that day. He's been moved to the number 10 role against FCSB, and he's obviously not had a meaningful run in that position because he's had an injury. So no doubt now he's back up to speed. He'll be given more opportunities there. But there's something inside us that tells me Kobbie Mainoo is supposed to be in a deeper role. I don't think he's supposed to be in that number 10 higher prominent position. I think his qualities are better seen, a bit most effective in the deeper position. I think he's just better there. And when he talks about maybe having concerns over his athleticism or his pace, been playing Christian Eriksen there in the last 2 games against. I know you're going to say, well, Eriksen's obviously not ideal, and he's but Mainoo's better than Eriksen.
I think his concerns are more about his off the ball work in not necessarily athleticism and pace, but kind of reading the game and understanding where to be. And
I think you need the right players around him though, and he doesn't have that.
I think you need the right players around him, but I'm not sure and maybe he'll develop it, but I don't think he's got it as a holding midfielder in terms of that understanding of where to be, the awareness of players around him. He was brilliant for United last season on the ball, off the ball. I think we've got to remember he was part of a midfield that was disastrous, essentially.
But how dysfunctional was that team though?
Yeah, I know, but the team was dysfunctional. But every single one of those midfielders has to take some blame for the way things went wrong. And Mainoo was the best on the ball, and he's probably United's most skillful player on the ball in the team. But without the ball, I'm just not 100%. I'm not sure that he's got the awareness to play there really. And I think Amorim was so, I think, unintentionally brutal after that FCSB game when I think he said, I think his words were he was struggling a lot with the defensive side, and that's a pretty strong statement to say he was struggling a lot. And he's not played a minute there since then. And I know he's been out injured, but I don't see a scenario under Amorim when he goes back into that position, to be honest.
I have been told there is a genuine chance he'll leave. I mean, people don't like to hear that. His contract, runs till 2027. Yeah. They have the option for the other year. People like to look at that and point that out. But it's not really about that because he's on at the moment a pittance. All the performance-related bonuses in his contract have been triggered, which obviously sweetens it a bit. But at the end of the day, if the player is on massively lower wages than he should be, something's going to happen there.
Yeah.
Because he will be sold. His camp will inform the club, look, we don't intend to sign this contract or any contract, and something will happen. He'll move. I think it'd be a tragedy if he moves, personally. I think you've got a player of that quality who's come through the academy, who's won the FA Cup, scored at Wembley. He's the player United should be doing everything to keep.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if you told fans one of those two is going, I think a huge majority would say Garnacho would be their. They wouldn't need it to leave, but Garnacho would be their preference.
Preferably keep both. Really.
But you look at what Mainoo did against Lyon, that goal, and that for me in a way is why he's good as a number 10, and it's what Amorim said, that his ability in tight spaces around the box is phenomenal. He's so press resistant and challenge resistant. His ability to keep the ball, manoeuvre the ball in tight spaces, I think it makes him a real weapon as an attacking player, to be honest.
But I mean, I've watched so much of him where he's in the deeper role and he's escaping the marker, using his body, using that agility, using that balance. And he's so good at using his body in that way. And that is one of the most valuable skills you can have as a midfield player.
Yeah, it is.
I can see why it's obviously very useful in the box, but having that kind of, you're looking towards your own goal, having that ability to pick up the ball and turn out and evading your marker is just unbelievable. It's fantastic.
It is. But it's great being able to do that. But when United haven't got the ball and he's a holding midfielder, has he kind of got the game and got the skill set to not necessarily win the ball back, but kind of, like I say, be in the right position and know where to be? And I think, I had my doubts last season, to be honest, when he was playing so well. And I still think he played really well last season, but I just wasn't sure that he was the right fit in that position. And the midfield, the mess of that midfield was not down to him, but he was. I used the phrase last year to someone that he was on the scene of the crime a lot when that midfield got cut open, and maybe that's a bit harsh.
I think it's
maybe it's a bit harsh, but what I would say is you look at what Amorim says, and
because
I think Amorim is basically saying the same thing.
It's a different system, isn't it?
When he says he struggles a lot, it's a different system, but it's the same principle. If you're the holding midfielder, if you're a deep lying midfielder, there's a duty to protect your defence, to be in the position to intercept passes, to follow runners and things like that. And I think when Amorim says he struggled a lot defensively, he's basically saying the same thing.
He needs runners around him. doesn't he? And he needs, I think, to succeed in that system, an Amarin system, every player needs to be right. And unfortunately, in this team at the moment, every player isn't right, and they need to address a lot of positions. But for example, if Amarin had a couple of transfer windows and got every player he wanted, and Maney was kind of parachuted in there, I think he'd have a better chance to succeed.
If they became a team with 65% possession who were dominating games,
but is that not what he wants?
Well, that is what he wants.
Exactly.
I'm not sure it's what you get in the Premier League, but
why not?
Well, who does it?
Guardiola's done it.
Yeah, seen how much they've spent.
Yeah, true.
And I mean, Amarim is a kind of young up and coming.
Liverpool dominate possession the majority of games.
They do. I don't think to that extent.
Done this season.
I don't think to that extent. But yeah, certainly if they get players around him and they become a more functional team, I think in 2 or 3 years maybe he drops back and does it. I just don't see a scenario at the moment, given what Amarim has said, that it's going to happen, and the fact that since that game in January he's not even played a minute in game in a holding role. He was used up front, and we came on up front against Leeds.
Well,
started up front.
I think it's almost
Palace.
a red flag for me, actually. The way, I don't want to use the word messed about, but the fact that Amarim's been inclined to play him in these positions.
Yeah.
Against Leon, obviously scored the goal and it was a stunning comeback, so no one's going to ever give it much thought. But when he was played up front, you're scratching your head again and thinking, what's he doing here?
Yeah,
it worked. He scored.
It did. Yeah.
But that's in one-off game.
Well, that's it. Well, if he's weighing up whether he wants to sign a contract and what his
and he's getting paid up front,
he's probably looking at it thinking, well, what is my future? And like I say, you look at the number 10s. I mean, for me, if they sign Cunha and Ahmad are the two that start every week, I think you'd have to say, unless Ahmad becomes this long-term right wing back, which I think is unlikely. And Amarim has said he wants a left footer as a number 10.
Kobbie Mainoo is too good not to be a starter, and he'll be a starter somewhere for me.
Yeah,
you talk about the kind of the competition in the number 10 rules. He probably wouldn't be an automatic starter because he's not a natural number 10 in Amarim's system, is he? It's not who he is.
I think his Mount,
Joshua Zirkzee.
Mount is a number 10. I don't see Mount playing a deeper role under Amarim. And Mount, A, he's an Amarim favourite. B, he's totally unsellable, given the injury run he's had at United and the wages he's on. He's one of the highest earners in the squad. He's just not sellable. Zirkzee, I think, you'd be happy to sell him or loan him back to Italy, but he can be a decent number 10.
But he's had a better season. We talked about his improvement in this number 10 role, and at least he's banked those kind of performances.
Yeah.
And in the office, when he speaks to Amarim in the summer and he's talking about where he's going to play and where he stands, at least he's done it. Mainoo's not really had those run of games and those performances in the number 10 role. No. He's had a few. Obviously, FCSB, which is the first game in January, he scored and assisted, but Zirkzee's got a larger bank of evidence to point towards in that position.
Yeah, he has. And like I say, I think in 2025, he's had some really good games in that number 10 position. If you're essentially looking for 2 or maybe 3 players beyond Ahmad and Cunha, presuming Cunha happens, then you'd be on Mount.
Very presumptuous of us.
Very presumptuous of us. But you'd be on Mount, and then maybe 1 or 2 from Zirkzee, Garnacho and Mainoo, which is why I think at least one of them will leave, because you give Mainoo a new contract, the pair of them would be earning combined, 300, 350? They're probably both at that level now. It's a lot of money for 2 players who you're basically saying aren't starters for me.
Yeah.
And when you consider the PSR benefits, I feel like it's almost inevitable that one of them is going to go, to be honest.
It does feel like that. Yeah. When you look at it in the cool light of day, objectively, and just from a complete logical standpoint.
Yeah.
For supporters won't want to hear it because the emotions involved, but if you look at it and remove that emotion, it makes sense.
Yeah, I think it's a very good chance neither are in the strongest team, Amarim's strongest team next year.
Yeah. We'll briefly talk about the Wolves' performance then. I mean, 1-0. I did think to myself, bloody hell, you can tell this United side are bad, because if they had anything about them, they would have beat that Wolves side 3-0.
Yeah.
Wolves weren't good.
Really
they were
poor.
crap, weren't they?
Yeah.
I mean, the bright sparks of the game, Harry Amas and Tyler Fredrickson.
Yeah.
A quick shout out to Fredrickson because he was on the cusp of a first team debut a couple of years ago in 2022, rated very highly by Eric Ten Hag. Got a really bad injury, I believe his ACL. He was out for a long time. I think it was around 16 months on the sidelines. Came back last year. He's now captain of the under-21s, recently promoted. So to make a debut after all the adversity he's faced and what he's had to go through, what a moment for his family, what a moment for him. And he did very well. And I say that because I think when you watch young players, you're trying to see if they're doing anything wrong, if they make a mistake, how are they going to cope at the top level? And you couldn't really tell he was playing. And that's always a good thing, I think.
Yeah, definitely.
Go under the radar.
Yeah, he was unnoticeable for probably the first 25 minutes, to be honest. And in a way, it was an ideal debut to make because, I know they won the game, but Wolves were poor and offered very little attacking threat. I thought United were comfortably the better team, but I think the moment that kind of it allowed him to settle into the game anyway, quite low key. But that moment when he dumped Cunha on his arse and then tackled him and took the ball off him.
We'll see you next season.
Yeah, see you next season. Yeah, I think that's kind of the moment where, like, if the nerves are still there after that, you're kind of like, right, I'm here now. Let's make the most.
I belong
of it.
to be here as well.
Yeah, I belong to be here. And yeah, I thought he played well. He was solid again. There's some options there appearing now at centre back, which I think is why you probably don't need to sign one this summer. And I thought Amas was really good again. His crossing's excellent. I wouldn't really have an issue with having Amas as backup to Dorgu next year, to be honest. I think he's shown in these performances that he's maybe worth the risk, especially when, again, Luke Shaw's going to be totally unsellable. I think you'd have Shaw as like Martinez's backup probably there, but if you've got Shaw in the squad still, then I'd happily keep Amas around and play him as backup to Dorgu. I think he's shown enough in these few appearances he's had that, considering he's only turned 18 last month, there's a player of real potential there.
Did brilliantly against Newcastle on his full debut at St James's Park, a really mature performance in difficult circumstances, raucous crowd, and then to perform like that against Wolves, I think he was the best player for United for me. Thought he was really good. You're right, some brilliant crosses into the box, which unfortunately weren't capitalised on. But how often have we said that? But you're right, Ty. Next season, you'd think he's good enough and he's got the quality to really play a squad player role in that team, you'd think.
I think
a left wing back. And going back earlier in the season, we've made some cheap digs at Erik ten Hag on this podcast in the last few months, probably. But I mean, he started. Can we just remind everyone that you overlooked Amas? Obviously, took him on pre-season, give him his chance, travelled down to the Community Shield, didn't get his chance when Malacia and Shaw were injured, which everyone was kind of questioning. And then it comes to Barnsley in the Carabao Cup at Old Trafford. Ten Hag started Toby Collier at midfielder at left back. Could you imagine what Harry Amas was thinking that night?
Yeah.
I mean, he really would have been scratching his head thinking, what the F have I got to do to get a game here? Fair play to the lad because he's got his head down, he's knuckled down, and he's got his rewards now.
Yeah.
And there was a chance to go out in January. The right offer didn't arrive, and he's got his reward now. Patience has been rewarded.
Yeah, totally. And, given the issues they've had at left back, it's a mystery why he hasn't played any earlier. I know he was 17 during United's left back runs, but he's shown he's good enough. And like we say, I mean, Toby Collier, I thought he started that Barnsley game really badly and then recovered pretty well, but he barely had anything to do. Yeah.
Talk about his age, talk about his size. It doesn't matter. You can stick him on at home at Old Trafford at left back against Barnsley.
Exactly. I mean, it's a mystery why Ten Hag. I mean, he seems to include Amas in a lot of squads, a lot of training sessions, the tour squad, and then just never played him. Community Shield felt like a great opportunity to give him his debut and just never happened. So, given the issues he had at left back along the way, it looks bizarre. And to be fair, it's taken Amas time to get in under Amorim, but the last few weeks, since he came on against Leicester, which, is a strange one. I remember tweeting when he came on against Leicester that, Harry Amas is a real person. There'd been that much talk about him. But yeah, it was his 18th birthday that day, and it kind of felt like a delayed debut.
Happy birthday. Is that your happy birthday?
That was happy birthday message.
You become a real person when you're 18.
Well, no, but because there'd been so much like, why is Amas not playing? Where's Amas? For so long with all these left-back issues, that it kind of felt like a delayed debut, even though he was making his Premier League debut on his 18th birthday, which is very early for a footballer. But there had been this kind of like, he was constantly on the brink, wasn't he? Constantly so close, and then just wouldn't play.
He definitely has bulked for a bit. To be fair, I mean, in the last 4 or 5 months, they placed him on a kind of mushroom
diet,
a mushroom diet, a conditioning program to gain muscle, and you can tell he does look more like a man. Yeah. Fair play on that. Big calves. I mean, I've got weak calves. Try to use them in the gym. An 18-year-old has got bigger calves than me. Yeah, I can eat me protein yogurts on my lunch break, but I still
did
don't
say
have
that
big
today.
Calves.
Yeah.
We talked about obviously Amas and Ferguson just there. Young players can be valuable squad players, can't they? And you're talking about in the first part the deadwood that's been shifted. And look, we're not saying they should be starting every game, and it's clearly a big step up. And you don't want to hype up these young players too much, which some people do in social media, and they get ahead of themselves. But there's definitely merit in them having a role in the squad, because when they're given the chance, more often than not, they show they're capable.
Yeah, definitely. Like I say, I think Amas has done enough to show that he can be part of the squad. And I think, Aidan Heaven is probably the other example. I think he's, as much as we're praising Fredrickson, Heaven's going to be above him. And I think Heaven's
going to be above him.
Heaven's going to be above him. There we go. He's going to be, he's going to be an obvious part of the centre back situation next year, and maybe that means Fredrickson goes out on loan or has a season playing somewhere. But it does show that I think when United signed Heaven in January, they probably weren't sure exactly what to do with him or whether he was going to need a season out on loan. He's come in and played brilliantly, and Amorim has said he's changed my plans. Basically,
well, the club were kind of saying he's a first team signing, which you looked at it and you kind of raised your eyebrows.
Yeah,
and then to be fair, you watched them and you thought, right, yeah, you could see it.
And he can still be a first team signing and need a loan. And I think what Amorim has said has kind of hinted at that, because Amorim has said of his performances that.
But in your logic, when we got into the centre back debate the other week, you said they needed to be kept.
Yeah, well, I think he does now. So this is what I mean. So when he came in before he played, Amorim was probably looking at it thinking, does he need a loan? Is he ready? Does he need a loan?
Yeah.
And I think from his performances, he's proved he's ready. And that's why they don't need to sign a centre back, which is what I said months ago, and has once again proved that I am right on this podcast.
Lastly, Bournemouth on Sunday. It was a weird game on last Sunday, wasn't it, against Wolves? Because
it's going to be a weird one this Sunday as well.
Yeah, I mean, the feeling, everyone knows it's Bilbao or bust. It's all about the Europa League. So it's a weird atmosphere in these Premier League games. But, and we keep writing it, and everyone keeps saying it, that the Premier League campaign's been written off and it doesn't really matter. It does matter to an extent, because we're talking about how they're in a bleak financial state and they need to raise money. And every single place in the Premier League is worth a couple of million. And you look at it, how tight it is at the bottom. We just talked about Wolves being level on points. Obviously, Everton are on level on points as well. So 38. Tottenham are on 37. West Ham are on 36. You've got around like 4 or 5 places at stake there. And that could be an extra 10 million.
Yeah, the Champions League's an extra 100 million. I don't think it's worth the gamble. I mean, I do think he'll play a strong team at Bournemouth, because he will want.
I'm not saying it's the priority, but it matters more than it doesn't matter. Do you know what I'm...
Yeah, I'm not sure.
You don't want to lose every game from now until the end of the season.
I think he'll play a strong team at Bournemouth, because he will want players in rhythm on Thursday night in Bilbao. And I mean, Bournemouth have been stumbling a little bit of late. I'd still make them favourites, to be honest. I'd be surprised if United won there. Brentford, I wouldn't be surprised if you made 11 changes for Brentford, to be honest, between the two games. I think that's one you totally write off.
That's fair enough, because that's in between them.
Yeah, and then West Ham, after that, you'd maybe play a strongish team. Chelsea before a potential final. I think, again, you'd probably make 11 changes. I mean, I said it after Sunday, to be honest. I think they finish 16th or 17th.
Well, realistically, they could finish 7th. They'll finish with Tottenham.
I mean, the thing is, Tottenham are kind of doing the same thing now.
Yeah.
That West Ham game is the one you look at and think they'll surely win that.
Because West Ham are horrendous.
West Ham are pretty bad under Potter, and maybe West Ham will finish 17th. But I mean, if United make a load of changes for that game and West Ham come and win, I don't see them winning at Bournemouth. I don't see them winning at Brentford. I don't see them winning at Chelsea. I don't see them beating Villa. So West Ham's the only one. And if by then all focus is totally on the Europa League final, I can see them finishing 16th or 17th, to be honest. And it's a funny one, because like you say, it doesn't matter at the moment. And these league games are, I mean, I thought they did all right on Sunday, to be honest, considering the circumstances,
obviously
considering the changes. Yeah. Given it, and it was 2 managers playing the same system, and I thought United looked better than Wolves, which has got to be encouraging to Amorim. But yeah, these league games don't matter. But if United finish 16th or 17th and win the Europa League, it'll kind of be like, we binned it off when we were 13th. Let's call it 13th in a trophy. If they finish 16th or 17th and don't win the Europa League, like, there's no saving grace. It's going to look disastrous.
Wouldn't it be absolutely incredible if this side was to win the Europa League?
Yeah.
We talk about the kind of the culture at the football club, the feeling. No matter how bad a team seems to be, seem to still win a trophy. How amazing is that?
Yeah.
It is amazing.
I mean, it would be incredible. And I gave pretty short shrift to the idea ahead of the playoff round and round of 16 that United and Tottenham would reach the final. But here we are, and
Tottenham got Bodo Glimt on us.
Yeah, I mean, the away leg is obviously massive for Tottenham in that one. I think United I don't know what the bookies say. I think United are probably underdogs against Bilbao, to be honest. I think it's tight, but I'd maybe have them 60-40.
Honestly, it would not be a massive shock if it was Bodo Glimt. Atletico Bilbao in the final.
Yeah, the people of Bilbao are absolutely desperate for that. The last thing they want is United, Tottenham, and
In the Basque
120,000
Yeah.
English football fans descending on their city. They will be desperate for Bilbao, Bodo Glimt. But yeah, it wouldn't be surprised if it was that, and equally, it wouldn't be surprised if it was
of course.
United, Tottenham.
Yeah. What a beige commenter.
I know, yeah. There we go. Fascinating insight once again. That's why you listen to the Midweek Debate.
Right, thanks for your time, Ty.
Pleasure.
Thanks as usual to the listeners. If you leave us a comment, please, on YouTube if you enjoyed it. Like, subscribe, etc. on your audio platforms. Have a great week and take care.